They say you don't notice silence until it becomes unbearable. But I did. I noticed it every day. In the way he closed the door without saying goodbye. In the way he stirred his coffee without looking up. In the way our bed became a border instead of a comfort. I remember the day it hit me hardest. It was a Sunday morning, sunlight was dripping through the blinds like warm honey. I was making pancakes, and our son, Ethan, sat at the kitchen island, humming something off-key from his favorite cartoon. Mark came in, poured himself a cup of coffee, didn't say a word. Didn't kiss me. Didn't smile. Just sipped. Scrolled his phone. Left. It wasn't the silence that broke me. It was how normal it had become. We hadn't argued in months. We hadn't laughed in even longer. And yet, if someone had asked me then if we were okay, I probably would have said, yes. We're fine. Because how do you explain a marriage that looks perfectly functional from the outside, but feels like a slow suffocation from the inside? Sometimes, I thought maybe I was overthinking. I had a husband who didn't cheat, who provided, who wasn't abusive. Wasn't that enough? But deep inside, something was dying. And the worst part was, I didn't even know what it was called. Mark and I met in college. He was quiet, steady, the kind of guy professors loved and girls trusted. I was the chatterbox in every room, always chasing the next spark, the next laugh. We balanced each other, or so I thought. We dated for 2 years, got married a week after my graduation. The wedding was small, simple. My dress was borrowed, the cake half homemade. But I was glowing. Not because everything was perfect, but because I truly believed we were building something real. The first few years were fine. We moved into a tiny apartment in the suburbs, ate frozen pizza on the floor, and dreamed about owning a house. Mark worked late, I got a teaching job. We were tired, but in love, or at least, we told ourselves we were. Then came Ethan. And like many first-time parents, we didn't know what hit us. Sleepless nights, medical bills, postpartum blues I couldn't name at the time. Mark became quieter. I became sharper. Our conversations shrank to grocery lists and bills. I missed the days when we used to stay up until 2 a.m. talking about nothing. Now, we barely made eye contact while brushing our teeth. Still, I clung to the belief that all marriages go through phases. We just needed time, space, something to reignite the spark. But years passed. We bought the house. Ethan grew up. We hosted holidays. Took family photos in matching sweaters. And somewhere in all that pretending, I forgot who I was. Mark stopped asking about my day. I stopped offering. He stopped reaching for my hand in the car. I stopped turning off the lights hoping for intimacy. Everything became muted. Predictable. Safe. And terribly, achingly lonely. I used to believe that the opposite of love was hate. But now, I know it's indifference. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by walls, by people, by your own family, yet feeling like you don't exist. I lived in that kind of loneliness for years. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors, no affairs, no shouting matches that echoed into the night. No bruises. No shattered dishes. Just silence. Just two people existing side by side like co-workers in an office that no longer needed both of them. Every morning, I woke up before him. I packed Ethan's lunch, ironed Mark's shirts, fed the cat, started the coffee machine. By the time Mark stumbled into the kitchen, I was already a ghost in my own home. "Thanks," he'd mutter. I'd nod. Sometimes he didn't say anything at all. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't careless. He just wasn't there. I remember once, I cut my hand on a glass while washing dishes. Blood streamed down my wrist like ink. I wrapped it in a towel and sat on the floor, dizzy. Mark walked by, saw the towel, and asked, "Did you spill something?" I nodded. "Yeah. Just water." He walked away. that moment stayed with me. Because in it, I realized something deeply painful. I had stopped expecting him to notice. And maybe he had stopped expecting me to speak. I tried, in little ways, to reach out. I suggested date nights. He said he was tired. I wrote him a birthday card that ended with "I miss you," and he said, "Aw, thanks," and went to bed. I bought a new dress. He didn't comment. Over time, the effort became exhausting. So I stopped. Instead, I poured myself into Ethan. Into teaching. Into yoga and weekend coffee dates with other moms. But even there, I felt like I was pretending, laughing too loudly, smiling too wide, filling every silence with stories just so I wouldn't remember how quiet my own home was. Sometimes, I lay in bed next to Mark and imagined what it would be like if he died. Would I feel relief? Guilt? Freedom? Then I'd hate myself for thinking such a thing. But I didn't hate him. That was the worst part. He hadn't done anything wrong. He just wasn't there anymore. And neither was I. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was picking up Ethan from soccer practice, standing near the chain-link fence with other parents. I was scrolling through emails when one of the coaches walked by and smiled. "Your son's got a great kick," he said. I looked up, surprised. "Thank you," I replied. He smiled again. "He must get it from you." It was such a small comment. But it lingered. Because for the first time in a long time, someone saw me. Not as someone's mother. Not as someone's wife. Just me. That night, I sat on the couch, watching Mark flip through TV channels. He settled on something, probably a cooking show, and stared blankly at the screen. I looked at his profile, the faint lines on his forehead, the curve of his shoulders, the familiar slump. I whispered, "Do you ever think about us?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Just us. As people. As a couple. As anything." He didn't answer. And maybe that was his answer. The next day, I sat in my car after grocery shopping, staring at the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, finally hearing the sound that had been filling my life for 15 years. Silence. And in that silence, I realized something. I was already gone. I had left emotionally years ago. I was just waiting for the courage to follow physically. It wasn't a big moment. There was no final straw, no explosive argument. It was like realizing the tide had gone out while you weren't looking. So I went home. And I told him. I want a divorce. He paused. He didn't look shocked. He didn't cry. He just nodded. Okay. And that was it. 15 years. Reduced to a single word. But strangely, that word, okay, felt like a door unlocking. A chain falling away. A breath, finally exhaled. The weeks that followed were strange. Not chaotic. Not tear-streaked or melodramatic. Just strange. Like waking up in a house that still had all your furniture, but none of your meaning. Mark slept in the guest room after our conversation. He didn't argue. Didn't suggest counseling. Didn't even ask why. Sometimes, I wondered if he had been waiting too. Waiting for one of us to say it out loud so we could finally stop pretending. We told Ethan together. Sat him down on the couch with cartoons playing faintly in the background. He was 13, old enough to understand, young enough to hope it was a phase. I remember his face, the way his eyebrows pulled together in that soft, confused way kids get when they're trying to be brave. "Are you mad at each other?" he asked. "No," I said quickly. "We just don't work the way we used to," Mark added. Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't cry, not then. But later that night, I heard muffled sobs through the wall, and it cracked something deep inside me. I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was leaving a family. A structure. A comfort. A narrative I had written for myself and clung to for over a decade. The paperwork was clinical. Names. Dates. Signatures. Boxes ticked and initialed. It felt ridiculous that a love story that spanned 15 years could be processed through forms and ink. I started sleeping better. Eating better. I noticed music again, songs I had once loved, now humming in the background of my rediscovered life. One afternoon, I sat on a park bench, watching the breeze play with the hem of my skirt. A stranger sat beside me, and we talked for an hour about nothing: weather, books, coffee shops. I laughed, an unfiltered, full-bodied laugh I hadn't heard from myself in years. And I realized, I hadn't been sad. I'd been numb. Grief didn't come in waves. It came in echoes. I missed the version of us that never existed. I mourned the conversations we never had, the intimacy that died before it was born. But most of all, I grieved for the woman I silenced, me. There's no applause when you save yourself. No celebration. No cake. Just the quiet realization that you're finally breathing with your whole lungs again. People didn't ask much. Close friends gave supportive nods. Acquaintances gave sympathetic smiles. Some whispered behind my back, but they seemed so perfect. Yes. We did. Perfect is easy to fake when you stop speaking. What surprised me most wasn't the sadness, but the space. The space I had in my mind. In my home. In my body. I painted again. I took long walks at dusk. I stopped rushing through life like I was late to something. Because for the first time I wasn't late. I was exactly where I needed to be. Mark and I remained civil. Polite. Occasional texts about Ethan's school projects or dentist appointments. We're no longer partners, but we're not enemies either. Just two people who once tried. Sometimes, I catch him glancing at me during handoffs, like he's trying to understand who I've become. Maybe one day I'll tell him. I'm just becoming the person I was always meant to be. And if you're still reading this, maybe silently, maybe in secret, I want to ask you something. When was the last time you felt truly seen in your relationship? Not tolerated. Not needed. But seen. And if your answer scares you, I hope you know you're not alone. Sometimes, the hardest decision isn't leaving. It's believing that you deserve to. I stayed silent for 15 years. Not because I was weak. But because I was afraid that choosing myself meant failing others. Now I know. Choosing myself was the first time I truly loved anyone, including my son. Because I taught him that silence isn't always golden. Sometimes, it's a warning. So if you're wondering whether it's too late, here's your sign. Start the conversation. Ask the hard question. Say the quiet thing out loud. You don't have to shout. You just have to stop whispering. Why I filed for divorce, after 15 years of silence, wasn't just a title. It was the moment I began again. What would yours be called?